it's so one-sided and the opposition is so weary. It's like, none of you are cricket fans, I don't think, but Australia played Namibia at cricket last night, and it was like it. No one wanted to see that. We poor little Namibians, they're doing their best, and Australia just went out and absolutely mashed them. And I think this is what is happening here. It's like a boxing match. It's not. It's like Tyson Fury against, frankly, Rishi Sunak.
Jane Moore, the message has very much changed, has it not? Well, it has for Grant Shapps anyway, because what it has been up to now is from the Conservatives, don't vote for reform because that's a vote for Labour. They don't seem to be saying that anymore. They seem to be saying that if you vote for anyone other than us, we, the Conservatives, could end up with as few as 57 MPs. That's their own social media ad. Do you find this a bit strange?
Well, it's not strange. It's factual, isn't it? I suppose. I mean, it's interesting that they're now worried about Labour's majority because, I mean, undoubtedly Labour are going to win the election. But, you know, they had a significant majority and look what they've done with it. So, you know, I have to say that they're only getting what they deserve.
But this majority, because the majority they had is 80, the majority that is being projected, and again, you know, it could be completely wrong, is much more than that. So does he have a point, do you think? That can you have too much power?
Well, I mean, even a majority of 80 is pretty good. It's enough to push through policies and, you know, they haven't done anything really with their 14 years. I mean, maybe a few bits and bobs, but yeah, that's what we're faced with, isn't it now? We've got somebody or a government that's been in power for 14 years and people are sort of saying, well, what have you done exactly? I don't feel like my life has particularly improved. And then you've got a potential government of people that have not been in power for 14 years. And if you remember back in, 2010, when Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Liam Byrne, left a note saying, I'm afraid there's no money. That is the reality, and that is what Labour are going to find as well.
Giles Coren, is Grant Shapps actually just being refreshingly honest, and perhaps that's what we can't quite cope with?
I don't think it's refreshing. I think anything about Grant Shapps is refreshing. But given that this is the honesty is his only option there. And one of the strange things about a general election is we say that we don't want them to lie and we don't want them to prevaricate, and we want them to answer the question. But the Tories, they are going to lose. They have to. They are. We can see they're going to lose. It's only a question of how big. It's like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid when the reality check they get from the old sheriff who says you're going to die ugly and all you can do is choose where. And it's so when you have a politician in the studio, if a Tory politician does not admit that they're going to lose, he's already lying. So for the Tories being on the campaign trail, trying to get votes, saying this is how we're going to win the election, that's already lying. And then you ask them how, and they can only lie or talk around the question. So they're in this weird position where in order to get trust, they have to admit that they're screwed. And that may be the thing that Grant Shapps did this morning. Whether he really was saying that, it's hard to say because I don't have the sense that the Tories care all that much. Once they've lost particularly millionaires like Shapps, once they've lost their seats, they're just going to go off to the Bahamas and have a nice time. I don't think they really care about the size of the majority. I think they're just so exasperated. I think all of us, really, I think this time we need to cancel the election. No one can face it. It's so boring. July the 4th seems so far away. I think they should, if they have any decency, they should just hand over power to the Labour Party. Stop all this horridness and just move on. Let everyone go on holiday.
Okay, no, we're not going to cancel the election. We refuse to do that.
Well, we have to. It's so boring.
No, it's not.
It's not boring, Giles.
Boring, Giles. Stop it. Stop it. We'll put your fader down. I'm only joking. Jane, just before we move off this, I think what's very stark here is that, you know, there are government ministers pretty much every day on Times Radio, sometimes 2 or 3 of them right now. And they all say come out with the same cliche, which is the only poll that matters is the one on the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak keeps saying, on the 5th of July, either myself or Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister, right? We know that. We keep hearing it. It's like saying they don't have a plan, we have a plan. And now Grant Shapps is slightly going off script. And I thought that was interesting, really. Why do you think he's chosen to do that, but the others haven't? Because there was one on Times Radio yesterday saying the only poll that matters, we've got everything to play for, is the 4th of July.
I think you know the reality is so stark now that it can't be ignored, and Giles is right. There's a lot of millionaires who are just going to go off, or multi-millionaires in some cases, and just lead their lives. It's not really going to make much change to them. But I do feel quite sorry for a lot of grassroots MPs who are very good and are kind of like doing the job as it is supposed to be intended, on local issues, who will lose their jobs. And I think they are literally despairing. And when they have a leader whose idea of deprivation is growing up without a sky dish, I mean, you could hear the mutual thwack on the forehead resonate around the country. I mean, it's complete nonsense. And I love the fact that Stig's talking about remembering growing up, the kid that had I was into my 30s, I think, when Sky came. So I feel really old.
I'm sorry about that, Jane. There's clearly a plan, though, Giles, because I guess what they're going to have to say is, we aren't going to win this election, but they can't really say that openly. So Grant Shapps came as close to it as possible. So there is an important game, I think, for the future of the Conservative Party, which is in play, which is how many seats do you win? There's a big difference between 80 and 160, for example. That's the whole course of the Conservative Party, the ability to be in opposition. That's actually a massive thing to fight for, because the difference between Keir Starmer with a complete free rein and Keir Starmer with some degree of checking that if some of his backbenchers rebelled and joined an opposition, you might get something going. That's kind of significant, actually, for the future of the country. That is actually what's being fought for. But your point is, I suppose, how open you should be about that if you're coming on the radio and saying we've still got a chance to win.
Well, you're assuming a sort of collective responsibility in the Tory party. You're assuming a sort of a genuine mission, genuine public service, that these ratbags who've made such a mess with their infighting and scrabbling and backstabbing for whatever it is for 14 years have some collective view of how they want to be in opposition. But we know that we're not. For example, Gove is leaving, and we know that he's not going to be there. We know there's going to be great decapitation of some of the big old dogs by one assumes whatever sort of majority Labour Party have. So it would be lovely if that's how it was. If we really thought, but we don't. We know that what's going to happen afterwards is this. Braverman is saying that they'll have to include Farage. That we're going to have the same old tussle, but with nobody that we really recognise fighting over it later. That's what ought to happen. We always look, don't we, at America, and we go, they don't really have opposition. They just have, every time the election comes around, they have a shouting match. But there's no one talk. And ours is getting a little bit like that, isn't it? There's no real sense that the Tories have some collective vision of something they want to stop happening. They have to still incite Corbyn and crazy momentum policies pre-2019, in the hope that they can make those stick to Keir, to make everyone afraid of a drift to the far left. Matthew Parrott's quite rightly saying there will be probably a pull from the left after the election. I just think your supposition there that the Tories ought to be doing something to minimise the majority suggests that they care. I think it's every man for himself. And then people like Kemi Badenoch with a big majority she's probably got these particular wish list of people she's hoping will lose their seat.
There's an argument
to clear the way to take over.
Well, the safest
Before we move on from this, can Giles and I have a sweepstake that goes on record as to what we think the Labour majority is going to be?
Go for it. Go on, let's put this down now. Jane, do you want to start?
I'm going to say 112.
Okay, so that would, just before we get to Giles, 112 would be big, but it wouldn't be eye-popping, and that it would be in the realm of ordinary political discourse.
I don't think it's going to be as eye-popping as we think, but it's going to be still quite big.
Yeah. Giles, any advance on 112?
Well, as you see, as an experienced gambler and a betting man, and a man who's broadly about, having seen Jane go for 112, I'm merely going to say 113. Which means that
have some pride, man.
I hate people who do that.
Well, she went first. Never let you.
I don't hate you.
She showed all her cards in one go.
Yeah, no. Have some pride. Jane, do you want to have any stakes on this, or do you want it just to be on pride alone? Do you want to challenge it?
Stakes? Yeah. Oh no, just reputation.
It's a different. From the way the betting looks at the moment, I'm going to say
as if either of us actually have a reputation.
I was going to say, having a reputational bet with Giles Coren is like winning in advance a little bit, but okay, that's all right. You've got. I don't mean it, Giles. I'm just lashing out. Jane, we're talking about the nature of this election and the honesty that's with it, and are we naive to expect any honesty in a political debate? Giles mentioned Starmer. I'm interested in Starmer and Corbyn, because you could say, well, the Tories confect these stories about Corbyn and Starmer. But Starmer mentioned Jeremy Corbyn himself unprompted yesterday, Jen. I wonder what you make of that, because to me, if I were Keir Starmer, he's going to win anyway, I'm sure. But I wouldn't be mentioning Jeremy Corbyn under any circumstances. He might want to make the case, I'm showing how far we've changed. But it is absolutely a factual matter. He stood next to Jeremy Corbyn. He believed in the 2019 manifesto. He wanted Jeremy Corbyn, a profoundly dangerous man in the eyes of many people, including himself now, to be Prime Minister. And now we have to accept that when he was doing that, he was just misguided, and he's changed and he's grown and developed. Does it damage him at all, do you think, the ghost of Corbyn?
Well, again, this is, another example of Keir's flip-flopping, isn't it, to sort of get himself into government and his party. But no, I don't actually think it does. I think, for me, this is another case of where our politicians now and all of the SPADs, the advisors around them, sort of tend to make decisions by looking at Twitter or whatever it's called these days, because I don't think most people in the country give a flying fig about Keir Starmer's history with Jeremy Corbyn.
Really?
But there's a lot of it on Twitter. And so I think they look at that and think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a major problem. We need to address it, which is what he's trying to do, sort of distance himself. I mean, for me, what will be interesting is if Corbyn gets in as an independent and is in Parliament as maybe a thorn in Labour's side, in a way, to a certain extent.
And that's why that majority matters, because if he wants to gather together some like-minded lefties from Labour, if the majority is 200, that won't matter. If the majority is 80, that might matter a little bit in terms of...
But as we know, it's going to be 112.
Oh, yes, I don't know why. Should we
113, 113,
man.
anything above.
Let's just give it that. Before we move on, Giles, I mean, you're a cynical man, I think. I'm a cynical person. We're all cynics here. I think the country's probably getting a little bit cynical. Are we too cynical? Is it cynical to expect politicians just simply to bandy around deliberate mistruths? The way numbers are being used in this election, is this just what election is? It's a rambunctious affair. There's a lot of rough and tumble. What you do is you confect the worst possible thing about your opponent and you add it up together, you make it sound really scary, and you keep going on and on about it. Is that just politics? Or are we entitled, in a country that's not grown in 2 decades, where someone needs to have an actual plan that might take us out of that economic sludge that we're in? Is it too much to ask that we get honesty and frankness when it comes to things like taxing and numbers, or is that too much to ask, do you think?
I don't think it's too much to ask, but I don't think it's especially different. One always thinks that. One always thinks, like when you hear them putting potholes in the manifesto, they think, oh my God, you really think there are more holes in the road than there were at some other time? It's absolutely bonkers. There is a sort of wistfulness and a nostalgia, and you look back and see Harold Wilson with his pipe and think, oh, why can't it be like that? But if you look at the newspaper editorials, radio conversations like this at the time, they'll have all been broadly similar. And I think what is unusual about this one is that it's so one-sided and the opposition is so weary. It's like, none of you are cricket fans, I don't think, but Australia played Namibia at cricket last night, and it was like no one wanted to see that. Poor little Namibians, they're doing their best, and Australia just went out and absolutely mashed them. And I think this is what is happening here. It's like a boxing match. It's like Tyson Fury against, frankly, Rishi Sunak. I mean, it's an unwinnable thing, and then that is never edifying. It's like lions and Christians. It's like a cat and a mouse. It's never going to be politics at its best. I think with a bit of luck, if the Tories regroup and you get next time, we might hope for a more honest debate. But here, it's just horrid.